So I'm Reverend Dr. Cheri DiNovo, Order of Canada, and I use pronouns she, her. When I first came out as a teenager, I identified as lesbian, but I didn't know you could be queer. I didn't know you could, so I identify as queer / bisexual. And yeah, that's me. I was just this kick-ass young woman. I was just, I didn't give a shit for rules and regulations and the kind of straight world that I was born into. I'd been a street kid. I'd lived on the street from 15. And at the time of We Demand, I was just kind of getting off the street into college, like did a high school equivalency program. So I was kind of in that interspace, but because I was such an outsider anyway, this was just more of being an outsider to like be, out. I was actually shocked when Gary told me that I was only the only woman and only one of two to actually sign on to We Demand. I mean, many showed up at the demo, but that gives you a sense for the time. People were frightened. I mean, we were illegal. You could be arrested. Even though 69 had happened, it didn't really mean much. It just kind of forced people back into the closet more in a kind of strange way. You could be fired from your job. You could not be rented to. You could not teach. You could not be hired in certain professions. Certainly, if they found out and you were on the police force or the military or anything like that, anything with security, you could be fired immediately just because. So all of this was the reality in which we were a part, right? But in many ways, I also want to like highlight how radical we were. I mean, we were radical. I always identified as socialist, still do. We didn't buy into the capitalist state. We just, we were kind of, first of all, we were privileged enough in those days that you could live on virtually nothing in the city of Toronto. You could rent an apartment, you could put yourself back to school and work part-time summers and end up with, a manageable debt. That is no longer the case, right? So you could be a street kid in that kind of economy a little bit more easily, but it still wasn't easy. I mean, you had to still some scram. So I was drug involved. And I never hid that. I always, even preached about it, story of hope, right? So that's a bit of the context of the times. We were very much still kind of in, even though it was like the early 70s, we were still very much, the world was still 1950s, like Leave It to Beaver, kind of, My Three Sons, let that kind of world. I mean, that world didn't ever exist for anybody, but that was the image out there, right? And then we're not part of that. So we grew up feeling that way. So as a teenager, I mean, when I walked into my first socialist Friday night forum, you got to picture this. I mean, I was a club kid. I was I danced all night, like, this was the era. I mean, I managed to wean myself off meth, which was still the drug. But I mean, I was still, so anyway, walked into my first socialist meeting with a body stocking with a sequin jumpsuit over it with platform heels, 2 pairs of false eyelashes. I dyed my hair black back then and had like a black fall, right? Can you imagine? I mean, the attire for lefties back then hasn't changed, right? So they're all wearing Birkenstocks and like, jeans, and this, whoever she was, walks in, So I was already out of place on the left. I quickly learned to, change my style. But I mean, why did I walk in there? Because I just thought, I mean, it was interesting. It was sort of about queer issues, and feminist issues, but it was really more like I just couldn't imagine capitalism constantly expanding and the world lasting. So the environmental issues were already a part of our lives. This is like 50 years ago, right? So so that's why I walked in. And then I discovered I'd walked into a place that had its own issues, especially around queers and women. For example, we had a demonstration for International Women's Day at City Hall in Toronto. And the leader of the Socialist League that I was part of said, we want all the women to wear dresses so they don't think you're dykes. Oh yeah. So that's on the left. So that's the so we started, we women, and then we started a paper, which I still have a copy of, called The Velvet Fist. And and the editor, among the editors, I was one of them, was Alice Klein, who started Now magazine in Toronto. So it gives you a sense of who was in that mix then. Anyway, we did that kind of as a reaction to some of the misogyny in the movement. But it was still queer phobic, even among the women. So eventually I just left, right? And just kind of immersed myself in queer culture. So I was just in that space when I got involved with Toronto Gay Action, which was the radical queer group back then. I mean, there was more of a mainstream queer group in Toronto called Community Homophile Association of Toronto. Even the name lets you know how they were more mainstream. And we just thought they were just way too mainstream. We thought that, you know, much more radical answers had to happen. So that sets the scene. So we were the radical group within queer activism. And so that's out of which came the We Demand document. And the Toronto Island First Gay Pride, you know, kind of reclaiming that space away from the police, was a fundraiser in part to get people who wanted to go to Ottawa to get to Ottawa from Toronto, because we were kids. So luckily somebody took a picture of it. I mean, it's the cover of my book now. I guess I'll just hold it up. But I mean, you can't be like, it's sort of, it's that original gay picnic with me in the middle, right? I always say I aged into blonde. So that was the context. And it was a really, I look back on it as a really exciting time. Like, yeah, I mean, anything could happen. You could be arrested, whatever. But I mean, it was exciting. I mean, you could feel movement happening. You could feel change happening. And the other part of the context of We Demand is we were completely utopian. Like, we were this band of crazy radical queers. And we didn't expect that we would win anything. I mean, if it's a corollary, I think of, you know, Black Lives Matter now demanding, you know, the abolition of the police or the defunding the police. Like, these seem like utopian demands, right? So, you know, part of the lesson to young activists is make those demands, like demand the impossible. It's the only realism, right? Be realistic, demand the impossible. Because every single one of our demands, and remember, there was maybe 50 people. I didn't actually make it to Ottawa. I couldn't afford to go. There were all white boys in that parade. But I mean, you know, there weren't that many people and nobody paid attention. Nobody cared. Like, we were not even a blip on anybody's screen. And the demands you made were just considered ridiculous by 99% of the population of this country, right? So that's the context We Demand. So again, I was just like, as I say, when I walked into that first socialist meeting, I was like a one-off, right? Like, I didn't fit in. When we had the Pride picnic, it was mainly, you know, well, first of all, Toronto was pretty white back then, but it was mainly white boys. Like, it was all about boys, and arguably still sometimes it is. Just saying. But anyway, so that was, but it didn't stop me. I was there with my girlfriend at the time. Like, you still love who you love, right? You still hang out with who you hang out with. And it was a really vibrant scene. I mean, the women's clubs in Toronto, think about it, women's clubs. I mean, we're like, they've gone. Like, that's sort of one of the losses, I think, in a sense. Like, we would, and I lived in New York for 2 years, and it was like just times 10 in New York, what it was in Toronto. But I mean, you'd walk into this like gym and it would be like some women's baseball club or something, like sign in, and then you'd like open the doors and there'd be like 60 women dancing, like, you know, and a DJ, and it was just amazing. And there were more than one, like there were many, and they were all kind of underground, but it was exciting. In New York, there'd be like 500 women, like so many of them half naked. Like, I remember some of the clubs in New York just blew my mind. So, I mean, that was kind of the club scene for women. So it's not like I was alone as a queer woman. It's just that, you know, just the movement that represented, what was called gay back then, tended to be all men, right? Tended mostly men, right? So, I mean, that was what I walked into on the activist side. But in terms of the scene side, in terms of what it was to be just queer and partying down, it was amazing. I mean, it was a lot of fun. And as I was laughing with somebody just recently, it was the one era in the history of humanity where we were sexually free. Like, you could take a pill and not get pregnant, right? HIV wasn't on the horizon yet. Any sexually transmitted disease you got could be cured with a pill that you could, do you know what I mean? So it was like not just even in a queer scene, but in entire scene of sexuality. It was like this, the 60s and 70s was just this explosion of sexuality, right? And free sexuality. So it was a pretty exciting time to be alive. So I don't want to make it sound like it was like, oh, drag, we're just like fighting uphill. No, I mean, and activism has to be a joy. Like, you're not going to do it if it's not fun, right? So let's make activism fun. It was fun, it was work, but it was fun, and we weren't alone. There was a whole community there that in a sense was, more ghettoized back then, because it had to be for safety's sake. Like, it was all really right downtown, Yonge Street, Wellesley in Toronto. Like, you go into any city, you could find the streets right away, right? And now it's everywhere, which is good. But because of that kind of, mentality, it was like a great small town, right? Like, you knew everybody, or you knew a lot of them, and people hung out. So there were good times, really good times, as well as, a world that did not want us around. So, I mean, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it, right? The old adage. So important to know our history, and not just American history, our history. We're so next to the big, the big nation, but we have a history here, and our history is far more progressive, quite frankly, especially in this province. Like, we are still one of, legally speaking, one of the most progressive jurisdictions in the world. And I'm really proud to have been a part of that, starting with We Demand, right? So starting with that summer. So that summer kicked off really the Canadian queer activist movement. And, I just buried a member of our congregation. He was 93, out, as much as he could be, with his partner, 62 years, but his life, that difference, like, was very different. It's very different, very closeted, very much more circumspect, very much less out, right? So we were that was the first era where, we were out, we were proud, we were in the streets, and demanding, we demand. So I mean, I like to think that every single one of the things we demanded, we've attained. But I mean, there were big gaps, right? Because we didn't know why, we were kids, right? So what was missing in We Demand is, I think, something also important to take note. What have we still not got? So what was missing was, this, because it was mainly written by men, you can feel it, like white men, so trans issues absent, right? The idea of non-binary and trans issues absent, really, from that document. The issues of intersectionality absent, race absent, indigeneity absent. All of that was not there. And all sorts of things. I mean, equal marriage was there, sort of, and having children was there, sort of. But I mean, to have, even that document didn't see, first of all, the whole range of queer experience and queer beings. And it didn't see, for example, conversion therapy, which we are, like, my bill brought it in and banned it in Ontario, but I mean, we still need the feds to criminalize it. And where is it, right? I take another election to get it. So there are issues. And also, I think quite frankly, looking at that document now, and it's in my book, by the way, all of it, is the role religion played. The role that right wing, especially Christianity, played, but all religions, in really being toxic for queer communities. So, for example, in my church, that's who comes in the door, are refugees from toxic religion, for the most part, right? So that's kind of, that battle is still ongoing. And that battle will continue to be ongoing. I mean, now, yes, we've got places to worship in all faiths. We have to, find them, but not around the world. And also internationally, we had no sense and we demand of the world in the, so, you got over 70 countries where it's still legal to be queer. You've got countries where the death penalty is still in place. So that kind of international spirit wasn't in that we demand. So these are all, issues that we're still fighting for. And until we do win some of those key battles, especially around organized religion, now internationally, I think there's still a ways to go. So that's exciting, right? Still activism to be done. Yay. Sure. Well, I think, first of all, toxic religion is a major, major hurdle in our world and in our country. And I think, and if it's going to be, gay or God, God's going to win, you know what I mean? So we've got to reclaim spiritualities. We have to take them back. This is not the basis of our spiritualities. Any of them, any of our religions are not based in queer phobia. I mean, tons of work has been done on this. So we have to reclaim them. We don't give them over to the right. Don't give them over to the homo, bi, and transphobes. Don't do that. So there's that. That's a huge battle. Intersectionality is another huge battle. I mean, we as people of white privilege and settlers, we got to step back a little bit sometimes and let's hear the other voices. And that's not going to happen automatically. Like, again, we've got to be looking at equity issues in our organizations that represent queer rights and outside our organizations. So equity issues, like we got to see faces of color, and indigenous faces being our spokespeople, as you are, thank you. So like we need that. There's that. And then, there's a huge range of women's issues. And by women, I include, of course, trans women and non-binary women. So there's huge issues we didn't win from the 70s still. Childcare, we still don't got it. It's affordable childcare. We don't have it. Until we have affordable, should be free childcare, we will never have women's rights. When you look at domestic violence and issues of violence against women, it's just as bad as it ever was, right? Like we haven't, and we're always still fighting for control of our own bodies. Like it's like we get abortion rights and then it's, clawed back, So, I mean, again, and I appeal to my, like brothers in the movement, queer movement. I say, yes, white men with dual incomes, yeah, you've done okay, but like, just remember over here, like, we still have some issues. You have to fight for us too, right? So again, those are some of the issues that we've got to look at. And then, as you pointed out, internationally, we can't stop at our borders. As long as, it's sort of like COVID, as long as any of us are in danger, all of us are in danger. Until the last person gets double vaxxed, in all of Africa, we're all at risk. And until the last queer person in every country in the world is free to be themselves and absolutely equal, we're all at risk from those same forces, right? So we live in a global reality, and that we have to look at. We can't stop here at our borders. So there's a bunch to do, right? A bunch to do, and trans issues are still, to me, if you want to look at, okay, so where is the most marginalized? The marginalized, to me, it's trans women of color. So we're still seeing trans women of color get murdered, at ridiculous rates and more. We're still seeing, trans women of color who are in sex work at incredible risk. We're still seeing this whole group. And that's why I brought in, the last bill I passed was Trans Day of Remembrance. So even under a conservative government, they all have to rise for a moment of silence in Ontario before question period on November 20th to remember those people who have died. And when you look at who's died, you see a lot of trans women, right? So, and we got to fight back, the TERFs. Whoever would have thought that would happen. I mean, oh, yeah, like really. So people got to get that, we have to unite against that kind of stuff, right? So, here, because how does the right wing, homo, bi, trans folks get away with it? They divide us. So there is no such thing as a feminist that isn't a trans inclusive feminist. It's not feminism, right? So let's just deny them the name. Let's confront them wherever they pop up. They're simply being tools of what is most killing us, what is killing us, quite literally, right? So again, we gotta do some education work here, which is why your organization is so great. Got to do it with young people to get them to understand first their history, how we got this far, and then how much farther we have to go, and we have to do it together, right? We have to do it together, and we also have to join with other forces that are progressive. Those are fighting against poverty, for housing, for guaranteed livable income, for all of those good things, because all of those things impact their people more. So yes, we fight for our identity issues, but also we fight for a new world. Because otherwise they'll continue to just divide us. We'll have a big demonstration and then it disappears. I mean, I hear this from my political colleagues who are still in office all the time. It's like, okay, it's great that you get, but where are you now? I want to push this piece of legislation. I need you. I need the activists behind me. I need the activists to be there. So again, I don't see a difference between reform and revolution. I consider myself a revolutionary, but I mean, I also think, let's change the laws while we're at it. Let's save some lives now, and let's work for a time when this will be all redundant. Let's do both, right? So is the political system lacking? Oh yeah, it's lacking big time. But there's still some good people there, some people of principle. We can work with them. Let's work with them, get what we can get done, and also be the radical edge as well. So, I mean, speak to truth to power. That's us, right? Speak truth to power, always. And I figure in my social activism, social media activism now, and and actual activism, it's always being an equal opportunity offender. It's not about partisanship to me anymore. It's about who's the person of principle, who's going to get the job done. I'll work with you on maybe just one issue, but I'll work with you on it. Let's get that done. Let's get this done. Let's get the other thing done. And then meanwhile, let's look at the system in which we are finding ourselves and say, this is really lacking. We need a whole new way of being. So that's me.